Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Scott Butler. I am the Manager of Policy and Research at the Ontario Good Roads Association for another 4 weeks before I become Executive Director. It's my distinct pleasure to welcome you to this latest conversation that we're having online during the pandemic, looking ahead more positively. And I think that the positive aspect relative to some of the other conversations we've been hosting in these forums, they will really shine through. We're gathered here under the idea that of the question is the new normal autonomous? There's no denying we've gone through a rather substantive change in the last 3 months, and it's looking more increasingly like some of the opportunities that are presenting themselves may align with what proponents of autonomous vehicles or connected autonomous vehicles have been talking about for years. We're going to run through a whole bunch of questions today, and we're going to look at this issue holistically from a number of different vantage points. We are joined today by legal experts. We're joined today by community activists, researchers, and practitioners. I think what we'll do is we will run through this. I'll ask, rather than taking time to introduce each of our panelists today, I think if you could just give me two-sentence overview, name, your background, and the organization you're representing. I think that'll be the most expedient, and I'll leave enough time for question and answers as we move on. I would remind everyone, you will see on the bottom of your Zoom module a Q&A section. If you have any questions, please simply post them in there, and once we're done the discussion aspect of this webinar, we'll be posing as many of the questions as we possibly can to our panelists. So to begin with, I'm going to turn it over to Fahad Shuja, who is the coordinator, impresario. I'm not sure what your exact title is, Fahad. Yeah, the leading light behind the largest municipal effort to begin thinking about adopting autonomous vehicles. Fahad, the floor is all yours here.
Thanks. Can you transfer the screen to me, sir?
Yep. There you go.
Okay. Let me know if you can see the screen.
Not yet.
No.
There we go.
Sure.
We're good.
All right. Okay. Are you seeing the video as well, or just the presentation?
We're seeing the landing page here that says OGRA, or Ontario Good Roads Association.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I'll try to make it very quick, but I just wanted to set some primer up for the discussion, especially because there are a number of folks online who may not have heard about OGRA before. So just setting up that stage, my name is Fahad Shuja. I am the coordinator for the OGRA member services. OGRA was established in 1894, and this was a time of transition, going from horses to horses, carriages, or cars. OGRA, because the idea was this was created by municipalities, for municipalities. Roads weren't all that in great condition, so we had something called the OGRA train that we would take with our equipment, staff, material, and then we go to different provinces, come back, teach them how to build better roads, come back and do it all over again. If you fast forwarded to 2020 now, we represent interests of 420 of the 444 municipalities in the province. And just as we saw the transition where OGRA began from horses to cars, the new transition, as you know, as you're talking about today, is happening within the vehicle, going from manual to automated. But it's all in OGRA's DNA to come to the municipal support and help through the transition. That said, we wouldn't be able to do anything that we have been able to achieve so far if it wasn't for the strong regulation that Ontario has put out. So thank you again. I've always made a point to thank MTO for this once again now. The major update that happened in 2019 was something that has put OGRA really on par with California and those other places like that. And the best example I can use is Knight Rider, where if Michael Knight was supposed to summon Kit from any part of the province, Kit could drive to him autonomously without anybody in the vehicle. And this is awesome, right? I mean, but as long as Mike has $5 million insurance and he follows all the MTO regulations. And that was serious, by the way. This can't happen. But MTO is really the gatekeeper of all the vehicle testing. What OGRA has then done is that kind of built on top of, or we're sitting on shoulder of the giants. We created this new subgroup of municipalities called MACAVO, Municipal Alliance for Connected Autonomous Vehicles in Ontario. The first project this group has worked on is called the Windsor-Ottawa Preferred Corridor. This is to help enable some close collaborations with municipalities on level 4 and level 5 AVs. The crazy idea was, you know, what if we could have a seamless corridor between Windsor and Ottawa where all the municipalities could come together, have a seamless way of sharing information, sharing data, and enabling the vehicle travel. The minimum distance between these 2 points is about 800 kilometers. Within 8 months of launching the project, 33 municipalities came and supported OGRA. And in an aggregate, they identified 5,500 kilometers of paved roads, paved municipal roads, and this officially helped us make that corridor the longest municipal corridor in the world for as preferred for AV level 4 and level 5 testing. In addition to that, they also identified 150 unpaved kilometers because if AVs have to succeed in Ontario, they better know how to work with gravel roads. So these are some of the municipalities that have taken part in the Windsor-Ottawa corridor, and many of them are online today. And I just want to say thank you once again for all your support. We truly appreciate it. Each municipality has a secure login access to what we call the MACAVO map. In that they can go in, they can identify their preferred roads as green, preferred paved as green, preferred unpaved as blue, and avoid as orange. We'll talk more about that I'm sure with the discussion, but it's a live map, and anything that a municipality updates, it goes live within 30 seconds. So this is a screenshot of what the corridor looked like. I cannot show you the whole thing because it's behind the login, but our focus now has kind of shifted off to into creating MACAVO map, the central point for all the data. So the biggest data exchange you can think of in the world when it comes to autonomous vehicle testing. A lot of these data points are also coming from Municipal 511. So you have the CCTV cameras from the province, you have the weather coming, you have the winter maintenance activities by the municipalities, also by the municipalities, any construction that's happening or is scheduled in the future, along with detours. And also we understand we have to play nice with our neighbors. So there is also the border wait times with the US. In addition to that, there's a lot more stuff, but I'm just going really fast with this one. The other thing that we've done was also work with third parties. You may have heard of ChargeHub. We work with them to get a direct feed of all the charging station locations, electric charging station locations that they aggregate, and we'll put that in the map as well. So all in all, the MACAVO map is from what we know, is the world's biggest road data exchange that exists today. It's live. And is there for use. Foremost, I mean, for the testing of a coordinated testing, a safe testing of autonomous vehicles, we can't think of a better way or a better tool that's out there. And that's why we built one. So all in all, we're in a very sweet spot in Ontario, particularly. We have a very strong regulation. Again, thanks to MTO for this one. With strong federal support, we have strong tech and auto sector. We have strong set of municipalities, and I can't stress that enough. Not only in terms of MACAVO, but there's also minimum maintenance standards that helps Ontario roads being in the best shape that they can be across North America. Yes, there's work to be done, but there's regulation in place that will help autonomous vehicles down the road, not just the regular road users today. OGR's role overall is basically the plus sign between the public and the private sector. So we're there to help support anything that can help kinder those synergies. And we just don't mean that in a cliche sort of way. We have a program called Friends of MACAVO, and we have a number of key agencies that we're working with already. What we've done for these agencies, public and private, and also academia, is we've given them access to the MACAVO map. And with that, they can add their business location. They can add CAV events that they're putting out, and even any project that are ongoing. All of that stuff is live, as long as you have access to the MACAVO map, you can access all that. Anybody that's online today, if you're contributing in the AV space in any sort of way, whether it's a vehicle, a V2X, CV2X, anything they can think of, let's talk. So with that, turning it back over to Scott.
Thanks, Fahad. Expediency was the name of the game, and you really you ran through that quickly. I'm impressed. So Fahad has, if you can stop sharing your screen there, Fahad, for the rest of us. Yeah, that's great. He's run through sort of what I think is the macro level, not the MACAVO level, the macro level understanding and efforts that municipalities in Ontario are taking in this space right now. A number of people are actually looking at different applications that these devices may have in that road space. Barry Kirk is first and foremost among the people thinking of that. He shot to fame with an infamous job interview, media interview, excuse me, related to autonomous vehicles. I'll let him explain that if he feels so inclined. But recently he's turned his attention to how winter maintenance may be modified because of these devices. So Barry, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I will ask you to give us your statement, where you see the opportunities, in particular regarding the CASPI initiative that you've started.
Great. Well, thank you, Scott, and good morning, everybody. I wear two different hats. I'm the executive director of KAVCO. We're a CAV consulting company, and I'm also the CEO of this new association called CASPI that I'll describe in a few minutes. And I think, Scott, I'll leave my story by the interview until later if there's time. So my answer to the question that is the title to this webinar is yes. The future will be autonomous, and in fact the CAV era has already started, albeit in a modest way. For example, advanced features are available in today's cars, including intelligent cruise control, automatic braking, and lane keeping. Also, we see low speed, limited capability, yet fully autonomous vehicles in use now, including shuttle buses, farming equipment, and heavy haulers used in mining. One example of this is the City of Toronto project to do a 12-month shuttle pilot carrying the public to the Rouge Hill GO station. And they've received proposals, and they should be announcing a service provider fairly soon. And it's interesting that both the TTC and Metrolinx are involved in that project. Also, driverless taxis are being tested now, and in a few years they will be in limited deployment in downtown areas. But if you're looking for a so-called level 5 car that can go anywhere, anytime, in almost any weather, we're looking at the 2030s before that's available. Looking at Canada and Ontario, both the country and the province are very well positioned in the CAV space. And I'm going to stick my neck out here, and I know there's a lot of municipalities listening. I'm going to pick out the two leading municipalities, I think, in Ontario in the CAV space. One is Ottawa, which I think is the #1 municipality in the country for CAV innovation, which I include research, development, and testing. There's a lot of tech companies, a lot of government work, the L5 CAV test site, and some great work at universities. I'd also award a prize to Toronto and the GTA for being the #1 city and region in Canada for CAV preparedness. Based on the excellent initiatives by the City of Toronto, the recent report from the Toronto Region Board of Trade, that was launched at BLG, as Donna knows. The top-down culture in the City of Toronto encourages asking really excellent questions. And the city's approach, the City of Toronto's approach to investigating the future of CAVs as a city-wide initiative and not just transit and transportation. Now, a lot of people think of CAVs as vehicles for carrying people, but there's also a big opportunity for non-passenger vehicles. Examples include the agriculture and mining machines I mentioned earlier, And there's a pilot project at the moment at London's Heathrow Airport to autonomously deliver cargo containers to planes. And another example of non-passenger CAVs is fairly new. It's automated equipment for winter sidewalk maintenance. Grand Prairie in Alberta has already conducted a pilot of an automated sidewalk snowplow. And a couple of airports have used have in fact had pilot projects using larger CAVs to clear runways and taxiways. With that background, a new association has been formed, the Canadian Automated Snowplow Initiative, or CASPI for short. I see that Canada is already a world leader in the technology for CAVs, and CASPI will expand on this to include automated snowplows. One of the key ingredients in developing any ecosystem is synergy. And CASPI will connect municipalities, equipment manufacturers, service providers, universities, and other stakeholders, and into an ecosystem for the advancement of automated sidewalk winter maintenance. And the benefit is that this is a way for municipalities to offer better services to their citizens while keeping costs down. Although CASPI is new, its accomplishments so far include the Canadian Automated Snowplow Competition, which encourages student teams from universities to compete. The 2019 competition was held at the L5 test site in Ottawa. Carleton University won, and the competition was supported by and sponsored by Transport Canada. In 2020, this year, 6 university teams from Ontario and Quebec competed, and Laval won the technical paper, and then the actual physical competition had to be cancelled because of COVID-19. And for the 2021 student snowplow competition, we're in early stage planning, but we're definitely looking at Toronto as a possible location. Another thing we're very pleased and proud of is that we at CASPI have signed an MOU with OGRA. And this is, I think, very exciting, and we're looking to announce other joint activities in the months ahead. CASPI will conduct research projects, and the members will get those reports. News on automated winter maintenance is now included in the CASPI section in CAVCO's monthly newsletter, CAV Update. We are also planning a conference focused on automated sidewalk winter maintenance to be held in 2021, probably in Toronto. And CASPI is also establishing relationships with other stakeholders, including all levels of government, the private sector, and academia. And to wrap up, yes, the future is definitely autonomous. The CAV era has already started, and it will expand in the years ahead, including into an exciting area of automated sidewalk winter maintenance. And with that, Scott, back to you.
Well, thank you, Barry. You gave us a lot to digest there, and I think there was, a number of different areas that we'll touch on later when we open up the questions. And again, I would remind folks, if you have questions, either the chat function on here or the Q&A module, easiest way to pose those. Obviously, what Barry and Fahad have talked about applies to your work, Richard, as the head of policy and communications for one of the companies that's probably doing the most work in real world settings right now in Ontario. Wondering if you can run us through the response to the question, and I'm assuming you have a corporate imperative to answer yes, but is the future autonomous?
Thanks, Scott, and thanks, Fahad. And before I begin, just a big thank you to you both and to OGRA, not just for the invitation to be here today, but also for your support, more generally speaking, for our work. You guys have been amazing. So I'm Richard Steiner. I'm a head of policy and communications at GADIC. I will say I've had a couple of technology issues recently, so if you hear a screeching sound in the background, Scott, Fahad, just raise your hand and let me know. Fortunately, My children are definitely out of the house, my 2-year-old and 4-year-old, so you won't hear them for sure. But technology gets in the way, then please just let me know and we'll figure it out. So a little bit about Gatik. We are an autonomous delivery company headquartered in Palo Alto, founded 2017 out in California. But at the beginning of 2019, we established a Canadian HQ in Toronto, Ontario. Originally designed as an R&D office of sorts, but rapidly evolved into an office which would be setting up operations as well. So some exciting announcements in the future to follow. A little bit about what we do, and to Barry's point, quite rightly so, when thinking about autonomy and perhaps the holy grail of autonomy, which is, you know, you want to get into a vehicle and have it take you anywhere, any direction, anytime. We would agree. We're a long way out. The world is a long way out from that. Barry mentioned the 2030s. That's not unrealistic at all. So what we do is focus specifically on short-haul business-to-business logistics, autonomous delivery, so goods, not people. So we help our customers meet consumer demand for real-time goods, dramatically increase road safety by operating on fixed, repeatable routes. So point to point. So our routes, our journeys always have a fixed start point and a fixed end point. And in so doing, what we're really doing is constraining the problem from a technology perspective. And this is what really sets us apart. I don't want to make anything at all about autonomous vehicle operations sound easy, far from it. However, from a technology perspective, when you constrain the challenge from point to point, from business to business, what we're able to do is map out the routes much more swiftly, safely, and get our vehicles operational much more quickly. So when people talk about autonomy as, sort of in the future, I'll come back to the question of, is the autonomous? Well, quite definitely yes. So we've actually been operating on public roads in the States since 2019, July of 2019. Our flagship customer is Walmart in the USA. So we deliver goods on their behalf and have been doing so for almost a year now. So for us, this is very much the present rather than just the future. We operate with multiple Fortune 500 customers across North America in a variety of different jurisdictions. But the use case, again, I'll stress, is really point to point. And for us, it's really been a no-brainer as far as autonomy is concerned, and certainly for the founders. What they wanted to do was identify a critical industry pain point. So when looking at the delivery space, given how e-commerce has gone, which even before COVID, and I'm sure we're going to talk to COVID throughout the course of this discussion, but even before COVID, e-commerce was exploding, up and up and up. It's an enormous market, $1 trillion plus, but the existing supply chain foundation was static, somewhat stuck and inflexible, and not really designed to meet the explosion in e-commerce, which is now gone through the roof. So more and more folks are switching towards a hub and spoke model in which you have multiple micro-fulfillment centers, mini distribution centers, so that goods are able to be transported very quickly from point to point to point and made available to a customer who wants to click a button and pick up their goods from a local convenient point within a small number of hours. In order to really do that effectively behind the scenes, which is incredibly challenging and costly without autonomy, you really need to automate your on-road transportation networks, which is where we come in. So that's been our business, it's a really exciting time for us in terms of that rise in e-commerce and what we're able to offer. So perhaps I'll pause there and pass back to Scott. But looking forward to the discussion today, and thanks so much for having me. Great,
Richard. As is often the case when we're talking about things taking place on the roadway and technology, there's always an overwhelming amount of optimism, and I think that optimism is sometimes brought down to earth by the legal profession. So that is why we have long riders when we install app and things like this. Adona, you've been working on municipal liability issues for a long time. Run us through, if we accept the premise that Fahad, Richard, and Barry have put forward, the future is autonomous, how legally will this play out in Ontario?
Yeah, Uh, so I don't want to subscribe to what, the school of thought that lawyers are the ones that dampen innovation, or the ones that say, halt, this is not legal, this is a great idea, but it's not legal. I want
We'll
to
use
take a step.
refine innovations.
Let me take a step back a little bit, and I gotta warn everybody. So thanks for inviting us to join this conversation. But unlike Rich, who smartly had his kids out of the house, my two kids are around here and may just make an appearance at any time, because my parents are stuck in traffic trying to make it here. So I apologize if you'll have these intruders show up at any time behind me. Taking a step back a little bit, I think I would agree that there is a lot of excitement around the autonomous vehicle sector in Canada and certainly around the world. And I know for a lot of people, just stepping back to, what does it mean for municipalities? How can this happen? A big question on your mind, I think it's sort of what has occupied everybody's consciousness, I think, in the last 4 months, is how has the pandemic impacted the development and deployment of autonomous solutions? So I happen to be, as you may have guessed, so I happen to be in the optimistic school of thought, that I think that the pandemic has perhaps crystallized actual applications of autonomous solutions to solve today's problems, including perhaps assisting occupiers, public or private entities, control access to their premises, enhance sanitary protocols, support contact tracing efforts, and provide mobility solutions for goods. GADIC is a good example of that. So what have we seen so far? To add to the enthusiasm, I think that folks in this field ought to have. So we're not talking about sci-fi. We're talking about actual products out there solving today's problems. So we've seen examples, obviously, in a self-driving food delivery vehicle example. So that's potential multimodal connecting autonomous vehicles application in supporting transportation and supply chain logistics. You've probably seen already. And I'd be interested to hear from anybody that's joined us from the great municipalities in Ontario. Drone applications as another method of possibly enforcement of COVID measures, but also to spray disinfectants. So we've seen that in a few jurisdictions already. We've seen that in the UK, Australia, France, Spain, Italy, US, and certainly I think you might have seen already, the early footage of the pandemic in China as well, and Malaysia. The other I think helpful aspect of this is, again, bringing it to, is this, are these solutions available and ready to solve problems now? And again, going back to my original thesis, that I think the pandemic has crystallized this more for people, has been in the medical field. So the delivery of medical supplies and test specimen has happened with the helps of CAVs. Monitoring health and conducting medical tests has also been assisted by autonomous solutions, and of course, I think early on in the pandemic, at the epicenter of it, we saw at least that's how it was publicized, is the first intelligent coronavirus hospital. You had 5G powered robots, do some form of dances for the folks there, and I think that's so. Obviously, the legal proposition then, so I come to I think I would be disappointing the lawyers perhaps joining, and I know there are a few joining this conversation today. So the legal proposition to consider in deployment of autonomous solutions will have much to do with the perspectives of one's engagement. So are you a company looking to set up shop in Ontario to develop, test, and provide these solutions? Are you already in the business of providing autonomous solutions? Or are you a purchaser of the product, or perhaps someone in the supply chain? So I think the legal proposition is different depending on the perspectives of the players in this space. When it comes to connecting autonomous vehicles, I think it's helpful for any municipality considering deployment of any of these types of autonomous solutions, is to consider, and frankly for any of these players in the space, is to consider what I'd like to call sort of the 5-legged structure of the legal framework. So, which reflects the constitutional division of powers in Canada. So on one hand, you've got, so you can't necessarily say, you know, I am going to deploy a solution here without necessarily thinking, okay, well, what are sort of the jurisdictional levels of power that I got to consider to ensure that I'm compliant. So one aspect of this is Transport Canada, and I think I'm not sure what my fellow panelists think, but I would say that Transport Canada has done a good amount of work in terms of putting out guidance, early guidance to the industry, and there's been some really helpful documents put out from Transport Canada on both guidance for trial organizations, that's testing of of connecting autonomous vehicles, but also providing a safety framework. And most recently, it was actually published in April of this year. It was a guidance document on cybersecurity, vehicle cybersecurity. And the interesting thing is, Transport Canada titled that as vehicle, and when I saw the title, I thought, okay, that's interesting, but you look deeper into that and read the entire guidance document, the focus is really connected autonomous vehicle, and the minister makes it clear why that is being put out and where the focus of that is. And the reason why Transport Canada is important is because it's in charge of setting and enforcing compliance of safety standards for manufactured and imported vehicles, including the importation of trial vehicles, investigating and managing recalls. And so that's an important sort of one part of the structure. The other one are provinces and territories. So that's, and the reason why that is, again, go back to constitutional division of powers, which many on the seminar will know about. But what's the stake of provincial sort of jurisdiction here? We've got, well, they're responsible driver licensing, vehicle registration, they're responsible regulatory motor vehicle insurance and liability. So connecting back to what Fahad said, I agree that there's been so Ontario was an early mover of the pilot testing program in Canada, and introduced a pilot regulations back in 2016 for a 10-year pilot. And there's been an amendment to that back in 2019, which arguably expands it, clarifies some insurance questions that we had, but it's a positive step in the right direction to create sort of at least the regulatory framework for testing of level 3 to level 5 vehicles and truck platoons. The other interesting thing is Quebec has a similar regulatory framework, introduced 2 years later than Ontario, and we're coming from I guess at almost, well, just past the 24-month mark of the introductions of that regulatory framework. Also, you may have seen in the news, again, pandemic has sort of what I say paralyzed most of our brains, at least mine, but interesting, Manitoba announced or introduced legislation to allow testing of autonomous vehicles on provincial roads in March 2020. So just in the last 4 months of this sort of change paradigm, and the policy drive. So going back to Barry's point about some of agricultural applications of autonomous vehicles, the policy driver for that jurisdiction appears to be a push to support Manitoba's large agricultural, trucking, and heavy vehicle manufacturing and technology sectors. So the other sort of elements of this that anybody sort of wanting to consider deployment of these solutions ought to consider, so from testing to development to deployment, is one element of the structure that in my humble opinion, some folks tend to forget, which is the jurisdiction of Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada to setting and enforcing compliance with technical and licensing requirements related to wireless technologies integrated in vehicles and roadside infrastructure. And so I think that's an important aspect, and also setting a spectrum too. So that party's involvement will become even more important, I think, as the industry moves to setting the infrastructure that allows connectivity between the vehicle and everything else around it. And so we get into this debate about 5G and DSRC, but it's interesting because this entity is actually responsible for that. So privacy, the other aspect of the structure are privacy SARs. So the commissioners, so the federal commissioner of privacy, and also the provincial ones are in charge of compliance with overseeing compliance with privacy laws, federally and provincially. And so that's another aspect, because much of this has to do with ensuring the proper use, control, access of personal, what may be personal information, and a ton of it too. And most importantly are municipalities. That's another element of the structure. And for those on the call, they're probably better experts than I am at this space. And we cannot forget the importance of municipalities in this, in ensuring the proper deployment of these solutions, because they're in charge of enacting, enforcing bylaws for local roadways, parking, managing passenger transportation. And I think what's interesting, and it becomes actually kind of more obvious of the importance, at least even in the testing stage for autonomous vehicles, when Ontario changed in 2019, arguably sort of expanded a little bit the testing regs, there was also a requirement for disclosure obligations and ensuring that this was not just to MTO, but also to the municipalities. So that's an interesting aspect from a compliance point of view, where municipalities come in as well, even on the testing stage. So I think the activity so far has been very positive. I'd say that it's interesting to me that despite the paradigm shift caused to businesses, public entities by this pandemic, that we've seen an incredible amount of development, even in the last 4 months, I gave you the example of Manitoba, March 2020, with the introduction of the legislation. Gave you the example of the guidance, cybersecurity guidance on vehicles by Transport Canada. MTO also released an important document, and I know Fahad was involved with that. That's CAV Readiness Plan, their final report, and that was developed through the collective input from a steering committee comprised of MTO, City of Toronto, Metrolinx, Region of Peel, and I understand 70 other regional stakeholders. And many municipalities were involved in that, and that's an important document. If folks haven't had a chance to review that, we're outside the stakeholders. That was published in, I think, March of 2025, if I'm right. But that's an important document because it sets out, at least attempts to synthesize what's happening in the ground, what's sort of identified as needs in the ground to deploy some of these solutions. And so the guideline that report comes out with, and it's from MTO, are sort of certain checkpoints. And they put out a framework about, what do we need to think about? So what came out of that was a few things. Well, you need to think of your infrastructure, your readiness of your infrastructure, your operations, your institutional readiness, and also your public policy drivers that will push to this. And I know Barry also, CAVCO and Information and Communications Technology Council also published an important document, which is sort of provides the current state and future trends of connecting autonomous vehicles. So from where I'm sitting right now, I think it's important to mention that while, there is some regulatory hurdles. Is it possible, if the solutions are ready to deploy? I think with creative thinking can make that happen. I think there's a lot of will. There's a lot of will from a policy perspective, perhaps politically as well. But I think the pandemic, in a way, the silver lining, I think of it, despite sort of the financial pressures, has crystallized for a lot of people what autonomous solutions can do to solve today's problems.
Great. We see questions that should come in on the Q&A modules. Some have been posted over here. More broadly, I think we've talked about where a lot of the opportunity lies. Specifically, it sounds like real estate often when I look at this conversation. So about location, 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 right? Or politics, all politics are local. What are those local considerations in Ontario that have prevented wider spread adoption of these technologies? And Fahad, maybe we'll begin with you. You've been the one working most closely with road authorities across the province. Typically, what are you hearing?
Okay, so in terms of adoption, I don't see municipalities being that barrier at all. I think the challenge, with all due respect to with GADIC and everybody else that's working in the AV space, is that they're all working towards the goals that the companies would have set, and the technology. There's no one technology that says like planes fly because of certain dynamics in the air, and everybody has to, whether you're Air Canada, whatever, Airbus or whatever, you have to follow those rules to fly. Autonomous vehicles are different in the sense that, a lot of the soul of the vehicle is actually in the software. It's not the hardware. Hardware does play a critical role. So that's where I think the issue is, where every company is sort of like they're holding some of the cards closely. And what that means is, so they're competing with other companies, which makes complete sense. And because of that, we're seeing that not too many of them are coming forward. So we're really happy with GADIC to come forward and actually start to deploy these vehicles so that we can start to see them on the road, and they become that much real, right? So I think that's my overall 2 cents. That it's just the dynamics. Its initial stages. I think once we pass that, once we start seeing the vehicles on the road, I think you'll see a much quicker adoption in terms of
Barry,
accepting.
No, fair enough. Barry, do you want to jump in there?
Yes, I would, Scott. I agree with what Fahad was saying. There's another issue as well, is this, the whole area of CAVs is moving very quickly. It's very disruptive. And at a municipal level, there are transit and transportation master plans that typically get renewed every 5 years, and it takes a year or two to develop a new master plan for transit and transportation. So it's very difficult for municipalities to react quickly within that framework to new technologies that have come on the scene very, very quickly and are very disruptive. And I think it's going to be worse rather than better. I've been saying for a while that what municipalities need in the future is not just mass transit, but a mix of mass transit and micro transit. Defining micro transit as shuttle buses and driverless taxis. And the way you mix and match varies by municipality. And all that is going to be turned upside down even more by COVID-19. I was reading in our local paper, Ottawa Citizen, that because of working from home and the way governments and the private sector will, for the foreseeable future, having people working at home, that will in fact reduce ridership and reduce revenue on public transit. And that creates a real problem with business cases. And again, it feeds into the need to very quickly rethink the long-term future for public transit and how micro transit fits into that.
Richard, did you want to elaborate on what Fahad and Barry have spoken about here?
Sure, thanks, Scott. And maybe I would add, certainly from my perspective, and I know from others as well, in terms of one of the major challenges associated with AVs in general has been what I would probably call a fairly monumental mismanagement of expectations. Since the earliest days. When this has been going on for many decades, really, but I guess I'm sort of referring to, say, the last, let's say 10 years plus, various different companies, fairly major ones and fairly major players have come out and said, next year we're going to see what you all want to see, which is the autonomous vehicles of the future on the road. They're going to do what you want them to do. They're going to take you whenever you like, et cetera, et cetera. And then that timeline's changed, and again, and again, and again. So I'm speaking for myself here, but I know for other folks as well, that mismanagement of expectations has probably left people with a slightly bad taste in their mouth, as far as AVs are concerned, and fair enough. And then I'll sort of bring it back to Gadek's use case and why we do what we do, and why we saw an opportunity to actually deliver on the promise of autonomy with our specific use case in timelines which were reasonable and set by us. What we always say is we're not trying to solve for all autonomy. We are trying to solve the middle mile. We are solving the middle mile, which is that hub and spoke distribution model I spoke to before, with our autonomous solutions. So we're constraining the problem with realistic goals, and we're actually doing it. And I know a lot of the projects that Barry's been involved with as well, in terms of that practical application for autonomy. These are great places to I guess help to instill public, industry, municipality, stakeholder confidence in the fact that AVs genuinely are the new normal, because we're really doing it right now. Yeah, there's I certainly accept that there's more to be done on that front, and it's why forums like this is so helpful and exciting. And from a municipal perspective, I mean, we're very excited to explore further discussions with municipalities, because given the use case that I spoke to in terms of our fixed, constrained, repeatable routes point to point, we certainly see alignment with a number of different municipal works and or municipal activity related projects there. So yeah, there's lots to discuss.
Adona, David Chen has posed a question in the Q&A section here. From a privacy perspective, can you elaborate on how AVs are more intrusive, or perhaps not, when compared to cell phones, especially considering location data in these devices is often impossible to turn off?
Yeah, no, that's an important question, and so similar to the earlier speakers, I think it's incumbent on us to take it a step back again and say, perhaps let's not talk autonomous vehicles level 4 and 5 in the future. What we have on the roads right now, and I think as of 2008, are connected vehicles. Vehicles that are equipped with the ability to connect to phones that may be of passengers or occupants in the vehicle, and be able to have that kind of technology that allows you, while sitting in your vehicle, to tell you where you're going, what's the nearest restaurant. So the vehicles already are equipped with that. So I think the challenge is already here. I think the players in the space have tried to mitigate the privacy concerns that comes with connectivity. And vehicles are no different, you're right, than any other, and I mean as a connected product, the connected vehicles at the base are no different than a simple inanimate object that has the ability to transfer, collect, and use data. I think the problem where it comes to trouble folks on the privacy compliance aspect is when it's actually personal identifiable information that's being cooked in there, and I think the real trouble is actually how do you store that and how do you transfer that? The trouble then becomes exponentially promulgated with autonomous vehicles, because you would have exponentially more data than in the connected case. Like a level 2 connected vehicle versus a level 5, and the reason for that is because that vehicle is now being asked to do so much more to be able to be autonomous. So I think the answer to that is the current framework, and I think we'll see a development. In anticipated reform on the privacy aspect of the world. Certainly in Canada, we've seen changes in other jurisdictions that will inform that. But I think, so again, I tend to be a bit more optimistic to say, so some of these issues have already been solved for, at least for the technology that's available today in the connected, as a connected vehicle.
Okay, Councillor Paul Ainsley, and I'm obligated because he's a City of Toronto councillor, but he's more importantly an OGRA director, has asked a question with regard to the complex governance structure in the Greater Toronto Area. How do we ensure the government response keeps pace with private sector development? He identifies an appropriate or functioning network of charging stations as one of those barriers. Adona, you brought up constitutional jurisdictions earlier. Do you want to start in on this one?
So that's a challenge, I think. So I think we saw that best in the way it played out with the Sidewalk Labs project in Toronto. and I think, I don't know if I have an answer to that. I just, my proposition would be that that sometimes when trying to solve for new and innovative products and the adoption of those products, I think one interesting sort of common denominator from a point of view of perhaps best practice cases, and maybe Rich might be able to weigh in here as well as Barry and Fahad, is this element of collaboration, and is this element of ensuring that stakeholders' voices are heard. Certainly more and more important for public entities that collaborate with private entities. I'm not sure the answer, and I don't know the answer to this. I know Fahad has something to say, but I would say the importance from a governance perspective is having the right governance framework that accounts for that.
Fahad, do you want to elaborate?
Yeah, I just want to reflect back what Donna had said earlier about Transport Canada taking a role. And one of the wonderful things that they've done is that they've identified key roles that each of the government plays. And I think that sets up a really good primer. And you know, there's a table you can actually go back to, and it says these are the things that municipalities are responsible for. These are the things that the province does, and these are the things that Transport Canada does. So I think that's a really good start. But I don't know if everybody else in the world has that. It's another leg up that Ontario has.
I just want to shift gears slightly. Sarah's Tarani's posed a question to everyone on the panel, asking what the highest priority for municipalities should be as they prepare for CAVs in the near, mid, and long term, with the idea that they'd be preparing, undertaking preparations while the technology is evolving and modifying existing infrastructure. Barry, you've had probably the most experience of any of us on the panel today thinking about this. What would your advice be back to councils?
Let me combine what I was going to say to the previous question and
Sure.
this one. It all comes in together. We've now finished 3 different consulting projects for the City of Toronto. And what I've told them, I've said this in public, is when I first started this first project with the City of Toronto, my instinct was that the biggest city in the country would be the slowest and have the most inertia. And I was wrong. I was dead wrong. And I've told them that. And they, in fact, have been very nimble. And they've done 3 things right, which I think are an example for all other municipalities. First, they had very, very good direction from top management. And, you know, it goes back to the days when Steve Buckley was there, for those of you who remember him. He really encouraged people to ask questions. He understood that there's an opportunity here to redesign the City of Toronto over the next 25 years. And he realizes it'll take a while to develop the answers. It'll take a while to get council approval, but he encouraged people. Second, I mentioned earlier that they have taken a city-wide approach. It's not just transit and transportation, it's the police, other EMS, parking, revenues, zoning, and virtually every department in city government will be impacted, and that needs to be looked at. And third, well, I mentioned it, you know, Steve Buckley and the Mayor Tory and so on, they've really developed a culture where they are supporting all of this work. They realize it takes time, but there's a very powerful open-mindedness to the new technology, which is not apparent in all municipalities. So those 3 things I feel are very important for all municipalities to keep in mind as we move forward.
Richard, from the private sector perspective, what advice would you have for councils as they entertain or deliberate how they can position governments to respond to this technology?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say first and foremost, have a structured discussion, you know, internally around what it is that you would want to get out of autonomous vehicles, CAVs, in terms of where is your ideal use case? What would you see most useful to your particular municipality? So think about what would be of most use, And from there, you know, you can start to think about who would be the most appropriate folks to work with depending upon the use case. So that would be the first piece of advice or thing I'd say. And second, from a policy perspective, and sort of building on the previous question and some comments made by all the other panelists. So Ontario, and we like Fahad did, thank the MTO greatly for you know, the regulatory landscape here, but also the right balance, I would say, in terms of you know, how the regulations have been rolled out, reporting requirements, support provided, all these things are a really great mix. When looking across, well, I'll just take North America, I guess, so looking at the States, and without naming names as far as states are concerned, there's a huge range of I guess regulatory landscapes out there, which range vastly from sort of a wide open you know, applicationless or permitless policy playing field as far as AVs are concerned, very much open for business, and we understand the reasons for that, but there aren't necessarily requirements, for example, to even inform you know, jurisdictional authorities that you're operating autonomous vehicles there. So there's that end of the spectrum, all the way to very, very strict autonomous vehicles, you know, not legally allowed on public roads or anywhere at all in certain states, and then everywhere in the middle. So from a policy perspective, I'd also encourage, you know, that open dialogue again. It's been very, very positive so far in Ontario. Long may that continue. And between the municipalities, the province, feds as well, that will help municipalities, I think, you know, when folks are targeting the types of AV use cases that would really be beneficial to municipalities, that'll help to you know, encourage and push the discussions in the right way as well.
Sorry, Scott. One more thing I wanted to add, and I think it's an important element of the way that sort of the Ontario case has been made from an autonomous vehicles perspective. I think an important role in an organization that I think we should mention as well as that has played here already has been the Autonomous Vehicles Innovation Network, that has really, you know, acted, in my view, as much of a hub of the players in the space at an early stage, and sort of much of an, you know, trying to accompany companies in their sort of commercialization journey for those going that way, and then trying to also, you know, make some magic happen with those already in the journey. So I think from there's so much that we can be and should be proud about. That we've achieved, but I do think that municipalities, large and small, and I think we've had the test examples. We have Innisfil, we have Stratford with the demonstration zone. I think there's so much municipalities can do, because I think they can be more nimble and agile, and perhaps focus in the way that Rich mentioned, in a particular, what are you trying to achieve? What's a use case? And let's make it happen with hopefully sort of top-down will. Okay.
The clock is 1 second here, Fahad. The clock's working against us. It's proving to be our enemy. We have a couple of questions here. Maybe we do a bit of a speed round. With so many companies developing competing AVs, is there a benefit to convergence of consolidation of technology, something similar to the Android, iOS domains that govern our smartphone lives? Fahad, you in there?
Yes.
Good answer.
I think watch out for Waymo. There's work happening, and I'm closely watching these guys. It seems to be a beginning of something there. I think one important question going back on the municipal side is, we look at as OGRA, we take it as a pride point to say we have 420 municipalities that we represent. When a company looks at 420 municipalities in the province, they look at it as a barrier and 400 doors they have to knock. So what OGRA has done, that's why we have created MACAVO, and this is the one seamless way to kind of connect everybody in. So if you're looking to update your master plans, try to make sure that you can include something in there that says you're going to join MACAVO. There's no cost to joining. What that does is kind of breaks down the barriers and the silos. And the other thing that would do is that if you can start creating an internal group within the municipality, start talking about what are the requirements, and that will lead up to what Richard is saying, and what Donna was saying, that it'll allow you to identify what are the things you want to solve.
Barry, what advice would you have for municipalities? Fahad just referenced it a little bit, updating their transit master plans at this point.
One quick piece of advice I haven't mentioned is The worst thing any municipality can do is to assume that the next 20 years are going to be an extrapolation of the last 20. We're in a very disruptive period, discontinuity, a forecast for the next 10, 20 years, however imperfect, that recognizes the new realities will be far, far better than just looking at the past and drawing a straight line.
Okay, Brian Anderson has asked a question about how municipalities should respond given the fact that during the pandemic, many of them have temporarily closed lanes, provided alternative uses for parking spaces. If the information that's powering an autonomous vehicle hasn't been updated or doesn't reflect that change, and there's some sort of claim that comes about as a result of this, what advice do you have, Adona, for a municipality in terms of protecting themselves and perhaps for industry as well? Really, this comes down to the road liability issue.
Yeah. Well, so I think the answer to that is it depends on sort of where that's happening. When you say autonomous vehicles, is that happening in the course of a testing case, or is it actually happening, you know, a current connected vehicle if something goes wrong? So one thing I would say is, and I'm not sure we have the for the, if it was a testing vehicle that was sort of involved in an accident like that on a municipal road designed for testing, I think the answer to that would be we turn to, if an accident happened, we turn to perhaps the insurer that insured that asset, and look to that for in some way to resolve the dispute. What we've seen already, at least in some jurisdictions, is this aspect that municipalities may be involved in these disputes from a road design perspective. So to the extent that there is assets within the public right of way that assist with connectivity to make connectivity happen, and if that asset is somehow compromised and there's a vulnerability that exists in that, then I think we will likely see claims. Do I see municipalities as being like a big player in terms of the liability landscape of the players involved? So you've got the manufacturer, probably supplier, if something goes wrong and you can identify it. The operator, to the extent that they could have prevented an accident. I don't see them as being necessarily a target.
Yeah, I think to the extent that you're correct on that, municipal experience says they're always a target when there's a road accident. So final, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, autonomous vehicles. I think in a different paradigm of autonomous vehicles, I'm not sure municipalities would be considered the target, but that's just my view.
We shall see. Rich, final question goes to you, and it comes around economy of scale. The William Davidson's asked a question: if there's a key understanding in terms of economy of scale, he's using shuttle buses on demand as the example. What's the comparative cost? And we've had conversations about this between AVs and, you know, similar types of vehicles that are maybe being used more widespreadly or more widely today.
So in terms of economies of scale, I mean, it's a great question. Certainly, you know, from our perspective, in terms of our business model, you know, hitting there's a perfect point as far as scale is concerned, I suppose, which meets the needs of our customers and our business model. And there's a lot of detail behind the scenes there, which I probably wouldn't be able to go into today. From a municipal perspective, in terms of the types of use cases, you know, I think there's definitely plenty of room for discussions to be had there on both sides, which would meet both needs. If we start to get into the economics of, you know, removing the driver from the vehicle and so on, and the types of cost savings that can come into effect from, you know, optimizing the types of routes, types of fixed predetermined routes that the GADAC operates on, you know, certainly there are multiple advantages and benefits there. So yeah, a more detailed economic discussion can certainly take place offline, and happy to chat with anyone further about that if there's interest.
Well, great. We've gone 4 minutes over our time limit, but I thought it was important to run through those questions. I want to thank each of you for taking the time to share your insights with us today. There's certainly, we could have run this conversation through the rest of the day quite easily. I would encourage everyone listening who wants to review this. This will be posted on the OGRA website in the not too distant future. Yeah, thanks again. Wish everybody a safe and healthy day, and we'll hear from you soon. Take care for now.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks for having us.
Bye-bye.